The aims of meditation. In reflective meditation, the mind's eye is directed horizontally, symbolized by the still water of the cup. In this reflection, it observes the object or theme of meditation, the seed thought. In receptive meditation, the mind's eye is turned upwards, seeking to discover what can be discerned at a higher level than that of ordinary consciousness and of the mind itself. The first step is the achievement of what for most people will be a new experience, the attainment of inner silence. This requires the elimination of thought processes that have been habitual or continually pulling the mind back down into everyday consciousness with its worries and problems and internal monologue and often obsessive thoughts and continuous utterances. It tempts the mind again and again with a supposed urgency about all the things that need to be done, or a regurgitation of past events, often emotional in context, going back over them again and again and again. Once this chatter has been stilled, and the corollary messages from the body are being constantly ignored, things like itching, scratching, hunger, discomfort, that is when truly interesting phenomena begins. Continued long enough, we begin to receive intuitions, inspirations, and messages from our higher consciousness. These are often experienced as a sort of stimulus or call to action. So how long does this take? One master suggests that even 12 seconds of complete stillness can produce samadhi, a Hindi word for an earth-shattering mystical experience. While this doesn't sound like very long, what typically happens when a person first attains this inner state of stillness is the mind suddenly becomes aware of the fact. Because it had been completely identified with its own thought processes, this awareness is experienced by the person as a sudden loss of self, which comes as a shock and then rouses the mind to search for itself in the usual places, jump-starting the thought process again and destroying the state. This threshold must then be approached again and again, and the mind becomes used to the experience. Once it realizes that its existence is not threatened by the abolition of thoughts, it then relaxes. Attaining this state produces a deeply profound sense of well-being. For what often seems like the first time ever, the individual experiences a release from the burden of thinking and the exhaustion it often produces. This state can become so pleasant that returning from it feels less and less desirable. With the onset of deep intuitional awareness, along with its highly rewarding inspirations and insights, the individual becomes more and more convinced that this meditative state is actually a superior state when compared to ordinary, everyday consciousness. From this point onward, the practice becomes easier and easier until it becomes almost effortless. More and more, the individual finds they can return to this state with ease and predictability. Eventually, they find that they can assume the posture typically taken during their meditative practice and enter into a deep meditative state almost on command. Once attained, this memory becomes anchored in the individual's awareness and can easily be returned to in a few brief minutes under suitable conditions. This means that it is no longer necessary to continue meditating at length, or even to do it every day, as was required to first attain the skill. In the beginning, to keep and maintain inner silence entails continuous effort. The mind, unaccustomed to discipline, tries over and over again to escape. Often, this manifests as a profound sense of boredom, or an inability to get comfortable no matter what position the body's in. Often, meditation is interrupted by the sudden onset of deep sleep or vivid imagery, almost on the verge of hallucinations. This is generally not very desirable, as the intensity of the experience or the visions disrupt one's focus. Sometimes this occurs without a person even realizing what is happening, and they suddenly find themselves instead very far away from the object of meditation and deeply engrossed in the mental imagery being produced. Achieving meditation requires a preliminary development of will. But it is this very development that lays the foundation of will by cultivating its preliminary strength. This answers the question: if the will is principally active, then why do we begin its development by cultivating what seems like a passive, receptive, contemplative state? The answer is because to develop this state seems unnatural to most modern people, and so developing the will in order to achieve that state both strengthens one's will and also lays the groundwork for achieving this kind of profound insight from one's higher levels of consciousness. The problem for most mystical types is that they think of meditation as an end in itself and do nothing more, whether they actually develop the skill or not. Meditation only lays the foundation from which we will build. Our will represents the vertical action taken, which causes the pyramid to then rise from that level base. The reason some people just make meditation the basis of their entire practice is that once that state is achieved, it's actually highly pleasant. Coming back from these deep meditative states into the waking world with all its demands and necessities and duties can feel like coming back from a vacation to return to work. But it's here, at this point, that the work of the will truly begins. After initial attainment in meditative practice, it no longer requires a great act of will to achieve this state. It becomes so easy that it eventually becomes the easiest thing to do, which is the key indicator of success in meditation. It's important to avoid letting the passive consume the active. There must be a necessary balance between both. After a period of great activity, we can return to the meditative state as a person might recharge a battery. This meditative posture might be thought of as one's royal repose, a state of ease that keeps the individual and their will charged with vitality. Meditation requires maintaining a steady, patient attitude as an observer of one's own mind for a certain time. During this phase, it can be helpful to persistently repeat a word or phrase. This is known as a mantra. The question might arise, how and in what form are these messages and intuitions from the subconscious and superconscious normally received? The most common way is by vision or illumination. Sometimes an unusual type of inner dialogue develops with a previously unknown part of oneself in which much prudence and discrimination must be exercised. Frequently, voices are experienced and messages are received, which come from or are transmitted by the personal or collective unconscious, and whose contents can be quite odd, or even represent a slanted sort of truth. It is by these unusual occurrences that people can be deceived, thinking that they are communicating with a higher source, rather than what may be an autonomous complex operating at a subconscious level. The force of these experiences can sometimes be intense enough to temporarily dominate one's thinking, or even obsess them with overly emotional but contradictory information. If this occurs, it's a good practice to write these messages down, but do not, at least initially, follow any of them or take them to be the truth. This is one of the trickier parts of deep meditative phenomena. We want to avoid getting derailed by these type of unconscious elements. The unconscious mind is a strange thing. There's no telling what's behind these messages or from what source they actually come from.